So starting from where I stopped in the previous lesson, the value of the ID attribute must be unique within the HTML document. That's one ID. It should be the only ID inside an HTML document. It must be unique. Okay? Then the ID attribute is used to point to a specific style declaration in a style sheet. It is also used by JavaScript to access and manipulate the element with a specific ID. The ID attribute is used to point to a specific style declaration in a style sheet. What we're talking about is that uniqueness. Okay, that uniqueness. So the syntax for the ID is similar to that of the class. The only difference between the ID and the class is that the class name is when you are calling a class, you use my class name. But when you are calling an ID, you use hashtag. The hash, then the the ID name. No more class name. If you are calling the class name, you use then the class name. Then ID, you use hash, then the class name. So I will be working with that very soon. So in the following example, we have an H1 element that points to the ID, my header. The H1 element will be styled according to the my header style element. So what I want us to do right now is to just clear the one we have for the class. Let me just comment it out. Let's clear it. So they are very, very similar to IDs. Classes are similar to IDs, but just clear what we have here. So we have this style is empty right now. So we just say, let's create an H1. Then we say H1. See my first my first heading. Then if we say my first heading, we can open this up in the browser, then refresh it. We have my first heading. But there's one more thing I want us to understand here is that we can give it an ID, which is just similar to class name. We can say ID equals to you can say my first header. Our first header. You can say my first header. My first header. My first H. Let's say my first H. My first H. Let me just write my header, Jerry. My header, H-A-D-E-R. My header. So now, remember, when we were using the class name, we used dots when we are trying to call it. This one is ID now, so it is not class, so you have to use the ID attribute. Okay, but just type in the name of the ID there. Then we can, if it is class name, we use dot my header. Okay, dot my header. We use dot my header. My header. Then curly braces, you can input our style and all that. So if we give it the background color of, let's say background color of tomato, it will not work. You see, when I say refresh my page, you can see that it is not working. Why is it not working? It is not working because this particular one, this is an ID, and the browser cannot find any class in this element, cannot find any class name. So if there was a class name with my header, it will automatically inherit it. But unfortunately, it will not work. But if you are trying to use an ID, you should use what we call the hash instead. It should be hash instead of the dot. It should be hash my header. That's the header name. The ID name, sorry. So if I save that by using Ctrl S and I refresh my page, you see that it is now inheriting that particular style. So now you understand the difference between IDs and classes. So I want to explain one more thing before we go. They are very, very similar. So if you understand this thing that they are different and it is used to style. So if we have under H1, for instance, H1, and we say my second heading, and if we give it an ID with the name my header, H-E-A-D-E-R, and I save it by using Ctrl S. If I refresh my page, you can see that it is still inheriting that same background color. But the unfortunate part of it here is that when we start working with JavaScript, it is no more business as usual, because you have to, IDs are meant to be specific. They are done so that in every particular element, we have a unique ID. So now, it is working. quite alright. You can see it is working because they all have the same ID names. But on the normal run, the main intention for HTML, why HTML created the ID attribute, was for you to say, okay, in my old HTML document, it is only one particular element that have this ID. So just make it make it an identity. You understand? Your ID card now, you are the only one that have that particular number. You understand? If you have an ID card, you are the only one that have that particular number. And that ID card is different from another one because they all have a different identity. So it is not best practice. So if you want to use but I say the same styles for different elements, okay, I advise you just use class for that. But if you want to use IDs, make sure it is the only ID name that exists in that document. So that is that for IDs. It is similar, so that is it. It's similar to classes. We'll be talking more about IDs later. You can increase the font size, you can give it padding, you can move the text align and all that. So the next one we want to talk about now is what we call iframes in HTML. So I'll click on that and wait for the page to load. Now, what is an iframe? What do you understand by iframe? What do you understand by iframe? Have you ever imagined, seeing a site online, for instance, let's say this microindifferent.com, or a Facebook page? Let me open the Facebook page. A Facebook page. Then in this Facebook page, we want to have something like we want to show this Facebook page in our own website. We want to import it. Let me refresh this. We want to show it right here on this our web page. On this our own web page. Is that possible? Have you ever thought about that? It is very, very possible, let me tell you. So insert the page the way it is right now. Facebook page is, we can display it on our own page. It is very, very simple. You can achieve that. It is very, very simple. I can tell you that. You can do that for any website, okay? So the HTML iframes is what you use to do that. Let's read a bit about it. An HTML iframe is used to display a web page within a web page. To display a web page within another web page, inside another web page. Okay, it is used to display a web page inside another web page. So we can display another web page inside our own web page, not a website. And I will tell you why as I proceed in this lesson. And you can always set, let's learn some more things. So the HTML iframe syntax. The HTML iframe tag specifies an inline frame. An inline frame is used to embed another document within the current HTML document. So let's work with the HTML iframes. So I'll say iframe. Now open it. Now we have the iframe. There is something I want you to know. An inline, okay. The iframe have can have as many attributes as different attributes, but there are some important attributes we should not miss out on, which is called the source attribute. The source attribute is the address of the web page you're trying to display on that your own web page. You understand? This is the web page. The address is facebook.com. I can go ahead and copy it by saying Ctrl+C. I have copied it. Then for you to show that on your own page, if we refresh our page right now, you should be seeing empty page, but we are seeing some kind of box. This shows that, okay, an iframe tag is here, but the iframe is empty. Now, how can we display something in the iframe? Okay? How can we display something in the iframe? If you look here, you see that the iframe tag is in HTML5. It is not really necessary for the iframe tag to have what we call an end tag. It has an end tag here because Visual Studio Code is automatically adding that for us, but it is not necessary. Okay? Because you don't have to write any text in it. You're importing something just like the way you're inserting an image. The difference is that this one is an iframe. So you say src. Don't use image tag for this. You say src, which means source. You say src is equals to the source of the iframe. Then you type in the address of that page you're trying to insert. Even if the address could be a page on your own website. And I've told you that I've talked to you about absolute and relative URLs. Okay, if it's a page on your own website, you don't have to add the HTTPS. But if it's a page from another website, you have to add the HTTPS, the domain name, that's the website address, and the page. So I'll just paste that here. The one with HTTP. Okay. So we have facebook.com right now in our iframe. So if I save this right now and I refresh our page, you can see that it is showing that facebook.com refused to connect. Now the question is, why is it refusing to connect? Let's try using another web page instead. So let's try using another web page. Let's use mykendefu.com. defu.com. So I'm trying to use mykendefu.com now to insert it right here. Now, why Facebook was not working was simply because I said for any web page at all. Well, okay, but there's something I want you to know. We have programming have different levels, different aspects. Where do you want to get to with your programming knowledge? For the one we have here, Facebook have automatically disabled their website from being embedded using iframes. That is why it is refusing to connect. So if you are trying to use iframe to display Facebook page on your own page, it's not work because their developers and their coders have disabled that, and it has to do with a lot of coding. But coding is easy. Okay, so that's what I want you to know. So you can see that we successfully embedded this page. Okay, so this mykendefu.com page right now is showing in here, as you can see. Okay, it is showing in here. And now that we have the mykendefu.com page showing in here, we can give it a title. Remember I've talked to you guys about title, and so when you take your mouse over it, there should be a tooltip. So I can say title should be a page from mykendefu website. Let's continue to save that. So if I come in here and I refresh my page, if I take my mouse over it, showing the title is supposed to be showing. So it's supposed to read it out. The title is supposed to help to read it out, but I guess I disabled that for my own website as well. So that is why it is not reading it out. As you can see, it is not reading it out. So, but if it's on another website now, let's try embedding the W3 Schools website address. So I can say W3 Schools, copying it and pasting it instead. So obviously, if I save this right now and I refresh this page, okay, W3 Schools is also refusing to link to our page. They have disabled it from their own end as well. So I'll just use my mykendefu.com like that. So I have disabled it, but normally the title is going to display this text, a tooltip. If this website you are trying to embed, insert on your own page, support it. If it supports it, but if it doesn't support it, it will not work. That is it. That is it. If it doesn't support it, my site, I have disabled it for my site, so it will not work. So you cannot see any tooltip. You cannot see any title when you do that. Okay. So that is how it is. That is how it is. So and let's assume that we don't have no link right now in between this. Let's assume this is empty. We have what we call just the hash symbol in between it. If I refresh my page, if I take my mouse over it, you can see that it's still just showing nothing. It's showing something like an extra page in between it. Well, it's empty. It's empty, so I'll just go back and type in. Why it is showing that something like an extra page in between? Why it was showing this was because we have what we call the style. We have the source attribute already, and we have something like an hash in it. There is a source attribute. That's why it's showing that okay, web page is supposed to be here, but no URL has been specified. So that is that for HTML source. HTML iframe source. Okay. So let's talk about the width and the height. If you notice something, you see that the width and the height of my image of my iframe is just small. Okay, the width as you can see, the width is small. So what if I want to make it longer? I want it to get here. Can I do something like that? Of course we can do something like that to make it longer. You can do something like that, and you use it. It is good practice. Let's do this for it. It is good practice to always include a title attribute for the iframe. This is used by the screen readers to read out what the content of the iframe is. So iframe set height